Hi friends, my name is Host Eric. I'm the host of Talking with Famous People. I'm going to respond to another comment that I received, which asks which types think before they act and which types act before they think. So, to begin to respond to this question, I want to go over a couple of concepts that are kind of cognitive function-ish concepts, I guess, but are kind of separate of it. Number one is executive versus constructive. Before I knew anything about cognitive functions, I was trying to understand people. I made a distinction between executive people and constructive people. Executive people like to have a plan in advance and execute the steps of the plan. Constructive people want to figure it out as they go along, get their hands dirty and see how it plays out. Certain kinds of things are more conducive to a constructive approach, and certain kinds of things are more conducive to an executive approach. The other concept I want to introduce is turn-based and fluid time. So, what this represents right here is action taken based on an assumption of turn-based time. The commenter wrote a comment, I got to read it and think about it, and then I get to reply. You could say that I took action before thinking here in some sense because I didn't bother thinking out the entirety of my answer. I just a couple of little things before I started making this video. But so the thing is, because I'm operating under the assumption of turn-based time, I don't need to worry so much about the question of whether or not I act first or think first is pretty straightforwardly answered. That I like to have a combination of constructive, which is say make it up as I go along, constructive approach towards turn-based time. So I want to be able to construct my own pace and whim and answer without having any further questions or input from the other party until after I'm done, right? So that's consistent of any action deliberation type, which is anybody with SE or NE in the 1 or 2, and therefore TI or FI in the 1 or 2. They're going to want to operate in a turn-based kind of time such that they can determine with the deliberation function what action they want to take and then take that action. And there's a presumption there that for the duration of time it takes them to complete that action, that nothing will change. For interface knowers, it's a different frame of reference. There's an assumption that time is fluid. And the reason this is the case is because the action they take is interfacing, which is not turn-based. So let's say I'm doing a stand-up comedy routine and I'm doing jokes and they're just not hitting and everybody's getting uncomfortable and restless and looking sour-faced. I have to read the room real time and if possible adjust accordingly, because I don't get to say, okay, you guys pause this interface while I go back to the drawing board and fix a few things and come back out and resume. If it were turn-based, that would be possible. But with interface things, it's not possible. So that would be an FE interface thing I used as an example. But the same thing is true of TE problem solving. If I start building a house and start doing all this stuff, but if I've forgotten to do the foundation first, well, I'm screwed, right? So that kind of ordinal necessity plays out as having a planned set of steps ahead of time, but it's it's interfacing in the sense that, like, once I pour the concrete, there's a certain amount of time I have to wait for it to dry. And once I pour it, I can't unpour it without doing a whole bunch of work, right? So I'm engaged in a dynamic interface with the system. If I see that I tried pouring it there, but it slid down over here, I can push it back up. So people who operate from a knowledge interface frame of reference, they're acting in a way that requires them to know instantaneously. They cannot pause time, deliberate, make a decision, then take another action without things changing in the interim. So the question of who thinks before acting or acts before thinking is a tricky one to answer, because everybody engages in some epistemics, that is to say, deciding or knowing, in coordination with their action. If they're knower deciders who, if they're knower interfacers who are knowers first, they're going to appear much more deliberate than interfacer knowers who are interfacers first, because their dominant nature is going to be either SI or NI. They're going to be knowing from their experience or knowing with their intuition. The thing is, knowing does not necessarily result in action, of course. So since they're knowers first, they're less likely to take action based on their knowledge than action types, say interfacers first, who are more likely to interface, who are going to be interfacing as a default and knowing as a way of facilitating that interfacing. For action deliberators, extroverted sensing is much more suitably aligned with real time than it is with turn-based time. But because they're deliberators, extroverted sensors like ESTPs, ESFPs, they still are operating under the assumption that they have time, that they need whatever time they need to determine what action they're going to take before they take the action. But they're very much constructive, even more so than perhaps ENTPs, in that they do assume, once they begin taking the action, that they'll be able to adjust on the fly, and in fact that they won't be able to successfully take the action without adjusting on the fly. This is in contradiction to the concept of action deliberation, because like extroverted intuition naturally goes with the deliberation function, because words and explanations and such, they afford you, they're consistent with turn-based time in a way that's a much more friendly pairing than extroverted sensing, because the reality is extroverted sensing decision making has to be done very quickly. If you imagine a football game or something, the quarterback scans the field and he's waiting for his NI to tell me that guy's open, and then he throws right on the that exact timing. So it plays out a lot more like a real-time relationship than extroverted intuition and, say, introverted thinking. I may have gotten a little off track there towards the end, but hopefully that explains the reality behind the question, though it doesn't exactly answer it. I think the answer is probably the type that's most likely to be impulsive in their action taking. Well, I think that probably your SE DOMs are going to be the most impulsive, so to speak, because they're configured to take advantage of opportunities in the moment, to pull the trigger when at the exact time and for the right opportunity. They're opportunists, That's not a bad thing. It just says that they're configured to be the ones who are making action decisions in real time. Whereas for me, if I talk a little slower as the thoughts kind of trickle in to help me draw this to a steady conclusion here now that we've hit 10 minutes, I can talk a little slower, I can talk a little faster, it doesn't really make any difference, right? That kind of action is locked into being turn-based, whereas if I wait a minute or 30 seconds to shoot the deer, then he may have gone someplace else or been spooked or something. So I would suspect that the types that are most likely to act with a limited amount of deliberation or / knowledge are SE doms. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to eat plenty of cheese.